Chapter 37 The New Universe The Revolution of Copernicus. During the Renaissance, young artists studied ancient art, young philosophers read ancient philosophy, and young scientists read ancient books about the sky and earth. One of these young scientists was named Nicholas Copernicus. Nicholas Copernicus grew up in the part of Europe that we now call Poland. When he was 18, he began to study science at the university in the big, busy city of Krakow. Copernicus had always been interested in the stars, and at the University of Krakow, he studied astronomy, the science of the stars. He learned how to read star maps, charts that show where each star is at different times of the year, and how to measure the positions of the stars in the sky. He also learned that the Earth stood at the center of the universe and was surrounded by clear spheres like balls made out of glass. Each ball was bigger than the next, and each had a planet attached to it. The stars were on an enormous sphere that surrounded all the rest, and each sphere turned at a different speed. This idea about the universe was based on the writings of the Egyptian astronomer Ptolemy, who had lived hundreds of years ago. Ptolemy's theories, found in his famous book, the Almagest, explained why the planets seemed to move around the sky at different speeds, sometimes coming closer to certain stars, and sometimes moving farther away. It also explained why the sun appeared to move across the sky from the east to the west. But when Copernicus used his instruments to measure the positions of the stars and planets, and then compared his findings with the Almagest, he discovered that Ptolemy was sometimes wrong. He was startled. He had always been taught that Ptolemy's book was the most accurate book about the universe that could possibly be written. Copernicus began to read the writings of other scientists and found that he was not the first astronomer to notice problems with Ptolemy's explanations. Others tried to solve the problems by suggesting Ptolemy's sphere theory needed more spheres. Perhaps there were more than 80 spheres surrounding the Earth, each speeding up and slowing down as it turned. Copernicus didn't see why the explanation for the movement of the stars and planets needed to be so complicated. He knew that another ancient writer, the Greek astronomer Aristarchus, had once suggested that the Earth moves around the sun rather than the other way around. Could this explain the difference between Copernicus's finding and Ptolemy's? It might, and it might also explain some other puzzling things he had noticed. For example, he had seen that the planet Mars was brighter at some times of the year and dimmer at others. Maybe Mars was circling the Earth in an oval shape. Then it would be brighter when it was closer to the Earth and dimmer when it was farther away. But Mars couldn't move in an oval if the other planets were attached to spheres. Mars would run into the round spheres around it. On the other hand, if Mars moved around the sun, sometimes Mars would be closer to the Earth, and sometimes it would be farther away. Copernicus thought that this new simple idea was much more likely than the complicated systems of spheres described by scientists of his day. He knew that simple, clear explanations were likely to be correct, and Copernicus realized that almost all of his observations would be explained if the Earth and the other planets all circled the sun. This meant that the stars were much, much farther away than anyone had ever thought, so far away that it was hard even to measure the distance. If Copernicus's new theory was correct, the universe was much larger than anyone had imagined. He thought that this new idea showed that God had created the universe to be more magnificent than man could imagine. But Copernicus was a devout Catholic, and for centuries the Church had taught that, since man was the most wonderful part of God's creation, man's home, the Earth, must be the center of creation. Copernicus was afraid that the leaders of the Catholic Church might not approve of his theory, So at first he only put his ideas into a little handwritten book called The Little Commentary on the Movement of Celestial Orbs. A few scientists read the little commentary and told him that he needed to print his ideas in a book that more people could read. Copernicus worked for years on a book that would explain how he had come to his conclusion. Finally, in 1543, he published On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. In that same year, he died. The first copy of On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres was put into his hands on his deathbed. After his death, the Church did condemn this new idea. Many priests were afraid that Copernicus's new ideas would be interpreted by others to mean that man was no longer at the center of God's plan in making the world. Even Martin Luther thought that Copernicus must be wrong. But slowly, Copernicus's theories were accepted by more and more people. Other scientists saw that if the Earth revolved around the sun, the different motions of the stars and planets made sense. Today we call Copernicus the father of astronomy because he was the first to explain the movement of the planets and stars in a way that made sense.